Belief is what makes magic magical. Many years ago, at the age of 4, I was witness to this strange flying animal land in front of me. All of us children ran away, thinking it's going to take us to a far-off land or probably eat us up or one of those things. The people navigating this flying animal were kind enough to show us around the machine, and it wasn't an animal, it was a machine. This was a helicopter. And thus began my love for anything that flew, be it planes, helicopters, any machine that flew. Few years later, living in a small town of Bhopal, my parents believed that the 4 basic necessities to life were food, clothing, shelter, and good language speaking skills. They didn't believe that Bhopal had the culture that they wanted to have me grow up in, and decided to send me to boarding school. I went to boarding school at the age of 7, and the only memory that actually comes to mind is of me running behind their car saying, "Please don't leave me and go, you don't love me enough." What went on for 7 years was no fairy tale, but it was a rather rough 7 years as a child. I was that one child who was always the loser in school, who never had friends, who people made fun of. I remember lining up for assembly once and no one wanting to stand next to me, simply because I wasn't the cool kid who they wanted to talk to. I thought this would change over time, but it really didn't. There were 2 options. I could either go back home and tell my parents to keep me in day school in Bhopal, or live boarding school. Boarding school seemed like a better choice, despite being a loser and the not-so-popular kid. Life moved on, and time came for college. I always had this secret aspiration, because of my love for planes, to become a pilot. We didn't have the internet then. Whatever I knew was thanks to Britannica encyclopedias. There were these really huge, big maroon books, which gave you all the information you needed for every project work, every passion, everything you possibly knew about. I wanted to become a pilot, but of course, belonging to a small-town conservative Marwari family, any vocation that was manly was not acceptable. The safer option was to study design. As luck would have it, I only applied to one design school in India, which I thought was the best. And I was very confident that I would get selected. Unfortunately, I was number 1 on the waiting list. But fortunately, that turned in my favor, as you'll come to know. I decided to pack my bags and move to Bombay and figure out a life for myself. The big city, complete independence. Boarding school was a very sheltered life. Things were done for you. You were told what to do. You were given a drawing book and you had to fill the colors in. Bombay was very different. There was no drawing book. There were just blank sheets of paper where you had to figure your own life out. And this was at the age of 16, being the youngest kid in college again. I was hell-bent on changing my popularity level. I was hoping that I'd be the most popular kid in school, or in college rather, and that did happen. But the only thing blocking my path to being the most popular kid in school was the pocket money I got. My father was a very strict disciplinarian, and the pocket money he gave me, I thought was enough to survive for 4 days. He thought was enough to survive for a month. So I had to figure it out. My ego didn't allow me to go back to him and ask him for more money. So I said, why not start working? I started freelancing for a lot of companies which needed design help, started doing the advertisements, drawings, sketching, etc., and made good money on the side. As life went on, the first year got lots of work, got more money than I knew how to count or deal with. There was a really good opportunity that came along. The marketing manager of a really big corporation asked me to actually assist his team and build an in-house design team to create creatives for them to use in newspaper advertisements and hoardings, etc. How would I manage college? I said, we'll figure it out. So I would do one college from 7 to 10 in the morning. That was degree college, which was giving me a degree in economics. I would do the next college from 10 to 3 and go to office at 4 o'clock. I would normally end up leaving office at 12, 12:30. And the next battle would be convincing the guard at my PG that I wasn't out drinking with my friends, but working in the office. So he should let me in to sleep. We figured out a way to that too. The guard and I became friends in exchange of favors. While working at this corporation, I used to be very open about my love for planes and keep talking about everything I knew. One such time, I ran into somebody who I basically discussed my love for planes with, and then identified a building on which there was a helipad which was wrongly placed. This man was very fascinated, and the next day he offered me the chance to help him completely set up the private aviation department for this company. I was very clear in my understanding. I mean, I know everything about planes through book knowledge. I know nothing about planes in real life. I don't know how companies are run. I didn't know how to make a business plan. He said, you have 1 month, make a business plan, and come back to me. Google, thankfully, had come about by then. I didn't have to go back to those Britannica encyclopedias. And I figured out a business plan in 20 days. This individual was very impressed, and he gave me the chance to set up a company in which we were buying assets over $200 million. The next 2 years went by. I didn't lead that normal college life that I thought I wanted to lead, being the popular kid in school. Instead, I paid the peon to mark my attendance and ended up coming to work at 7 a.m. every day. Those 2 years taught me a lot. I still hadn't come out of my shell. I would still give in to whatever I was told, although I was very aggressively working at this company. It was time to graduate from college. I had a tuition teacher who would come 1 month before exams to the office and teach me everything I'd missed throughout the year, so I could pass those exams. I did pass with a degree, with great marks, thankfully. My Orthodox family then said, look, you can't be doing a job. Okay, it was fun during college. It was all great. Now it's time to move on. Why don't you come back home and get married? I had to escape this. I was all of 19 and a half. There was no going back home and getting married. I convinced them that an MBA is what I need. And when I said I want to do an MBA in aviation management, I was again told, no, you don't do an MBA in aviation management. Who'll marry you? Do an MBA in finance. Finance is a role you can do sitting at home with your husband, with your in-laws, etc. Great. I didn't know the F of finance. I still hate finance. I went on to do an MBA in finance and found myself a job with another company in London, which actually gave me all the knowledge that I missed out on in my current role. I spent around 1.5 years in the UK exploring the world very, very differently and coming out of my shell slowly, but not so much. In my head, I was still that child who was the loser in school, who gave up on things, etc. And the MBA got over. Now my parents were hell-bent on getting me back home and getting married. There was no escaping it this time. So I came back home with a plan in mind to convince them that, look, I want to set up a company. I want to do great things. I've got great job offers. Give me a couple of years. But life, unfortunately, had other plans in store. I came back home to Bhopal. 2 days at home, my mom said, you've been complaining of this pain in your arm for the past 1 year. Let's go to the doctor. I hate the doctor. I had never been admitted in a hospital ever since. The only time I'd been admitted in a hospital, which wasn't a real hospital, was boarding school hospital for fake fever to escape my exams or something like that. So I said, okay, let's go to the doctor. How bad can it be? We went to the doctor, who was also a family friend, and what was supposed to be a 20-minute appointment to actually diagnose the pain in my arm turned into an hour-long ordeal. I'm not known to have patience. I stormed into the doctor's office and I said, I need to know what's going on here. The doctor looked crestfallen. I'd never seen him like that. So I looked at the paper under him. They were my reports. I took my reports from him. I said, thank you very much, and I walked out. I sat in the car with my mom and I opened the reports, and the first line read, diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma. I never paid attention in biology class. I had to Google what Hodgkin's lymphoma was, and Wikipedia's first line said it's a type of cancer. I knew I didn't want to tell my mother this while she was taking me home. We were all supposed to go out for dinner as a family that night. So I called up my father and I said, why don't you come home? There's something we need to talk about. Soon after my phone call, I think the doctor called up my father, and he came home well prepared. What followed was, I think, 2 to 3 days of a lot of aggressive tests. I had to be admitted into a real hospital for the first time for a surgery, for them to actually test if it is cancer or not in more detail. I remember being wheeled out of the operation theater under the influence of anesthesia and telling my father, please tell me it's not cancer, tell me it's not cancer. But unfortunately, it was. It was at that moment something changed in my life. I was always that person who felt sorry for myself, who said, why am I a loser? Why does no one like me? Things like that. It was at that moment that I took a decision that, I'm going to control my destiny, and I'm stronger than cancer, and I'm going to come out very, very victorious. I saw the look on my parents' faces, and I knew I had to be strong for them. I knew I had to cure myself for them before anything else. The next 8 months was a whole new world for me, from never being into a hospital to various hospitals across the country, lots of needles, nurses, chemotherapy, huge machines giving you radiation, etc., etc. All throughout cancer, there were days when I would wake up not wanting to wake up. There were days when I didn't know what was happening around me. But fortunately for me, cancer was also the best thing that happened to me. Because remember, I had come back home to get married. Now that I had cancer, I didn't need to get married. So while I was recovering, I spent a lot of time on the internet figuring out what my next plan was going to be. Because I knew cancer had bought me a couple of years at least, and I knew I was going to come out of it. I spent my time developing what was then an idea called JetSetGo. I basically wanted to bring around transparency in the private jet and helicopter market in India. I had remembered people telling me that, you know, Kanika, why is hiring a private jet in India like rocket science? I said, I'm going to change this. The day I recovered, I decided to pack my bags and move to Delhi to set up this company. The day I finished treatment, rather. My father was dead against it. He thought I needed to stay back in Bhopal for a year and recover from what had been an 8-month-long ordeal. If I had stayed back in Bhopal for a year, I would have needed a shrink. You know, I had to get out of there. I moved to Delhi with very little money in my bank account, but a whole lot of friends who were very helpful and kind. Spent the next 2 years just figuring out how JetSetGo would work in India, would people accept it. You know, the first few people I went to laughed at me and said, who's going to book a plane on a phone? Someone told me, who's going to book a plane from a 22-year-old girl? There was a customer who I went to pitch to who said, you are going to fly a plane? You know, it took me a lot of time convincing him I'm not going to fly a plane. I'm going to be the person providing him the best planes in the country. And I'm going to change the way the world flies. At the end of every day, which didn't go by well, there used to be this conversation I used to always have with myself, telling myself that, you know, we are going to change the way the world flies. This man doesn't know what he's talking about. 2 years went by, one day at a time, and JetSetGo finally came to life. I was the only person running the company. I'd started it with whatever little money I had. I remember answering the phone, changing my name to Sunita, Rita, etc., because I didn't want customers thinking it was a one-man show, or one-woman show, rather. Yeah. And time moved on, and I didn't give up. I think perseverance is what played the most important role, apart from belief, which is extremely important. As I needed help, I found a co-founder who changed the way the company works. I found a co-founder who gave me the support I needed. We moved from being one person to 10 people, 10 to 20, 20 to 30. We moved from doing one flight a week, which would drive me nuts. You know, I would spend the whole week just preparing for that one flight, to what we are now, where we have one plane in the sky on an average every minute of the day. Yesterday, I had a customer come up to me and tell me, Kanika, you've reduced my private jet bill by almost 30%. What's the magic ingredient behind it? You know, I'm yet to figure out the magic ingredient. But what I do know is, when I was diagnosed with cancer, I remember a whole lot of my family standing around my mother and telling her, oh my God, even if she recovers, how will you get her married? You know, so I remember walking up to them and saying, listen, I don't need to get married or do any of the things you expect me to do. I'm going to be on the cover of Forbes in 5 years. I had no clue how I was going to be on the cover of Forbes, or how Forbes worked, for that matter. 5 years later, in March of 2016, early March, I was thinking to myself, you know, we've been in the Forbes a lot of times. We've got excellent coverage, but I made this tall claim exactly 5 years ago, and people are going to laugh at me. Then I convinced myself that no one's going to laugh at me, you've come so far. Don't worry about it. Exactly shy of 10 days of 5 years getting over, I got an email from Forbes saying you've been chosen for Forbes 30 under 30, and we would like you to be a part of this. Again, you know, I don't know if there is a book that was written on how to fight cancer and accomplish your dreams in 5 years. I don't even know if this book exists. I haven't read it. But I do believe that if every one of us believes in ourselves and in our own dreams, we can achieve whatever we set out to far greater than what you've heard today.